is Swapnil Bhartiya, and we are here at KubeCon in Seattle. And today we have with us Dirk Hohndel. First of all, thanks for coming to the show once again. And I think this time we have a lot to talk about, but about a totally different topic we have never talked about before, which is compliance, but different kind of compliance, right? So you're talking about, you delivered a talk, a few days or weeks ago in Japan. Tell us about the talk first.
Yeah, this was last week in Yokohama at the Open Compliance Summit, and I talked about the talk is rather provocatively called "Don't Ship That Container." But what I'm talking about is compliance and security in container images, and some of the challenges with the way we package container images today, how the packaging format works, and the example is of course Docker containers, and how it is really, really hard to actually know what's inside your image. And that has huge implications on security, of course. If you don't know what's inside your image, how can you know it's secure? And has, of course, implications on compliance. How can you report the correct licenses, give the correct copyright notices, provide the corresponding sources, all of that. But one of the key concerns is if you look at the Docker files for a lot of the containers that you can get from Docker's hub, you will see in these Docker files things that are allegedly best practices, but in my mind are actually worst practices. You will see, and you will find this in a ton of Docker files, downloading a random binary from a user's account of GitHub, making it executable and running it in your container. That is a compliance and security nightmare. You will find examples where people in the official Docker image of a very popular database product, they add a repository from an independent company, then they pin all packages to that repository and run apt update, apt upgrade, which means now every single package could be replaced from that repository you have no control over. So you no longer know what you're running from a security perspective, but also you don't know what you're running from a compliance perspective. And if you look at some of the requirements to ship corresponding source, that is actually a huge problem. If you run an Alpine container, Alpine contains BusyBox. As we all know, BusyBox has very strong feelings about how you have to provide corresponding source. And if you run an Alpine container, do you actually have access to the exact corresponding sources that, according to the copyright holders, you have to ship? So this is a topic that I think this industry isn't paying enough attention to. It's a topic that the Linux Foundation is actually starting to look into. They have just announced the automated compliance tool project under the Linux Foundation. We, VMware, have donated a project into that working group, into this project. So the Turn project, and it was announced this morning in the keynote, is now part of a Linux Foundation. And the goal of this project is to help you understand what's inside of my container. What am I shipping? What are the implications from a compliance perspective, but also from security and just common sense. Being able to understand what it is that you ship is really important.
Yeah, you mentioned the new project at Linux Foundation, and they have like SPDX is there. A lot of projects are there. So
it's OpenChain, it's SPDX, it's Quartermaster, and Turn.
Right. So there are some already existing projects that they do look at compliance or in other projects. So the discussion that is after your keynote, what kind of discussion is going on around the compliance or health of containers?
Well, so I think what's different with containers is that people look at this as if it was something completely new and as if it changed rules. But in reality, containers are a packaging format, just like RPMs or DEBs. Instead, the container packaging format is much more similar to what you do on a Mac or on Windows, where you basically ship a whole file system with all of your dependencies included. But since you're now including those dependencies, you have to worry about those binaries, where they come from, how they were produced, and where the corresponding sources, where the copyright notices are. And this is something that, in all the excitement for this new format, I think a lot of people are simply overlooking and are not paying attention to. And I worry about a rude awakening if we have a copyright troll or let's be honest, if we have a concerned copyright owner who feels that their rights are being trampled here, starting to enforce their rights. And that could be very unfortunate. So it is conceptually not a new problem. It is in the way the tooling works, in the way the established practices, I don't want to call them best practices, in the way the established practices in this industry work. We have created an environment where we don't always do the right thing. And I'm being very careful in saying that, because I think you could be much more aggressive in that statement.
Because if, as a Linux user, when I look at Linux distributions, they solve the problem because the distros used to be the gatekeepers. You have the repository where you control every single package. So there was no risk whatsoever. But you're right, with the Docker, the container word, you can just put anything. And then when you say about compliance, where is the onus?
The problem is, again, the best practice, the standard industry practice is that if you develop a container, you start with from something else. Who owns that something else? And one of the very simple things for a company to understand if they actually control what's inside of these container images is to simply take their environment where they built their production containers and turn off internet access and say you cannot download anything from the internet. Everything needs to come from internal resources that we have verified and looked at. And it's fascinating to see how many things break. You install something from Node.js, and unbeknownst to you, 3 packages down, something downloads a binary from the internet and installs it into the file system. And if you look at the bill of material at the top level, it all looks sane. But what happens during installation is what matters. And I think as an industry, we have drifted a little bit away from truly controlling what it is that we're shipping.
So after this initial talk that you gave, what kind of momentum it has picked, or what do you see is the next step towards actually making it happen?
So I have talked about this topic for about a year. I have given a few presentations at various events, typically more towards the compliance community. And every single time I give this presentation, the feedback that I get is, oh wow, I hadn't thought about it this way. I need to talk to my IT people, I need to talk to our product people, I need to talk to the security people, So typically from the audience, I get a response that said, this is fascinating, this is interesting, we need to take action to get ahead of this. And this is large companies, small companies, consulting companies. It is a very consistent response that I get. And so the conversation with the Linux Foundation about creating the ACT umbrella project and donating Turn to the Linux Foundation, all this started out of a presentation that I gave at another Linux Foundation event earlier this year about the same topic. So this whole topic is something that has grown in attention, in relevance, in participation over the last year. And we now have an automated compliance tool track at the Open Source Leadership Summit in
Sonoma?
in Half Moon Bay next spring.
Okay, yeah, next one, okay. What I have been noticing is when we talk to a lot of, whether I talk to Greg or whatever, that you guys are talking more about security and compliance and all this. It's more graduating to the next phase because the technology has been taken care of. So now it's the next phase of. So what are the things that you are concerned about now? Because all the basic technology you were involved with from the early age, they have all matured. So what is your next?
I don't know if all the basic technologies have been taken care of. I think we continue to innovate. And if you look at Kubernetes and projects like Harbor, projects like Helm that we heard about a lot this morning, we continue to see new features, new expansion of capability. I think one of the shifts over the last decade has been from software development as an engineering profession, as something that is very based on deep understanding of all the components, where people spend a lot of time on optimization, on algorithmic choice and all that, to something that almost feels more like a trade. If you look at many of the booths here at the exhibition floor and many of the talks, it seems much more the style in which trades teach you how to build a house. Well, you use 2x4s and 2x6s and you have a maximum distance of this. And that's exactly how people do this. They'll use these building blocks, but they don't always understand what's inside the building block. And they no longer spend as much time as we did a decade or two ago in figuring out what is all the code that is now running? How does this all work together? What are the side effects? How do I combine those? And you mentioned earlier Linux distributions, and to me that's actually a very relevant comparison, because in the Linux distribution you have the distribution maintainers who look at all of these components and they find versions that work with each other. They test across different projects, different packages, and they do this integration work. And then you simply install an application on top. Whereas today, in the cloud native world, there is a lot more assembly of components from different sources that is done by the application developer, by the end user, basically. And so this has shifted the roles a little bit. And this has shifted the things that I'm concerned about, because now suddenly security and maintainability and compliance and all these topics are no longer things that the engineers have at the top of the mind as they create these solutions. Instead, you delegate this to the people who develop the components that you're just combining. And so that, I think, is why you see me more talk about these topics than about the underlying technologies. Because the technologies are solid and strong. This is not criticism of containers or Docker or Kubernetes or anything. It is a criticism or a comment on how this industry is changing in how we are putting these solutions together and how we are thinking about our innovation in this space.
Excellent. That's true, and that also shows the level of maturity of the, because now you're concerned about the things which are not, at the back of the mind earlier. One thing that when I walk through this, booth area, I do see a lot of companies where I see that they're like overlapping is happening. A lot of companies are trying to offer the same kind of solution. So do you see there will be some consolidation? Of course, VMware itself, you have just, today closed Heptio, So what do you think about, and IBM acquired Red Hat. Before that, Red Hat acquired CentOS. So a lot of consolidation is already happening. What do you see, how the trend that you see in terms of maturity of the ecosystem itself?
So I think a part of a maturing ecosystem has always been that you have a thriving startup scene and you have this dog eats dog competitive environment where some companies succeed and they become big companies. Some companies succeed and they get picked up. Some companies stagnate. They may be around for a long time. They may not go away, but they don't really break out. And a lot of companies start and then the funding runs out and they go away. I think this has been a constant for the last 25 years, 30 years that I've been in this industry. What has changed a little bit is maybe the scale at which some of these acquisitions are happening, the amount of money being spent. What has changed also is how visible this direct competition for the exact same space is. And as you say, if you walk around here, if you pay attention, you can see a solution for the same problem being provided by 4, 5, 6 different companies of different company sizes, different spots in the maturity cycle, different spots in their own corporate development cycle. And to me, this is actually super healthy. To me, this shows that the cloud native space is a very, very healthy and innovative space, and a space that behaves exactly as we would expect it to behave if you want to have a thriving ecosystem. The fact that we have strong competition at almost every layer is good. We have seen a lot of consolidation around Kubernetes. A lot of companies are thinking of Kubernetes as the orchestrator. And we are seeing that Kubernetes itself is like growing the layers that are included in the definition of what is Kubernetes. So the Knative announcement certainly added more levels to what Kubernetes was all about. Yet at the same time, we still see a lot of companies innovating around the edges and creating solutions around the edges. And certainly my own company, we believe that Kubernetes and this ecosystem today, as it is developed, assumes that you have a virtualized storage, virtualized network, virtualized compute at your disposal. And we believe that we have one of the best options to create that through our products, and then you can layer these open source technologies on top of it. So we are in that very same boat where we say we have our part of this ecosystem where we have differentiation, and then everything else we are working with the rest of the community. We are very active collaborators and contributors, and to me this is a sign that this is a fascinating place to be in, and a place where a lot of companies can have a lot of success and a lot of opportunity.
Right, and if we look at, I don't know whether you like the term innovator or not, because I think I remember a keynote where, but the way I look at it, if I look at from that perspective, these are all innovators. They came up with their different solutions. In isolation, they did not work with together. So that's also a good sign that there's so much talent here. Also, people are creating new technologies. So innovation.
I use the word innovation myself because it's a good way to talk about this next layer of solution of taking something from an idea to something you can deploy. I also think that this whole topic is sometimes oversold and overexposed. Not every idea that is being pitched is actually new. Our friends from IBM will tell you that virtualization is something that they did in the 1960s and 70s. And that containers are not an invention of Docker. But what is new is the context in which they're used, how they're used, the open source communities around them. And the thing that to me is so interesting about open source is that it allows us to work together in a way that we didn't have 2 decades ago, where the large companies, even though we are competing for the customers, at the same time are working together to improve the core technologies that we all work on. And it's really rewarding to see these teams of stout competitors sit together and have great conversations and great discussions on the next version and the next release and the next feature and how to move the community forward. And to me, that is a great sign of something that we didn't have in the past, and where the open source community has kind of changed the rules on the playground. And that's awesome.
What else is keeping you busy these days, other than compliance of containers?
So of course my team at VMware keeps growing, so that is always entertaining and always keeping me busy. I continue to be involved in a lot of the overall, how does the open source ecosystem, the open source industry grow? Where can companies help? Where can consortia help? As you know, I'm on the board of the Linux Foundation. We spend a lot of time thinking about how we can create a better way to get people, get companies together and create an environment where we can create healthy open source projects. So that really is what I spend most of my time on, both from an engineering side, from a compliance side, from a legal side, from a community side, from a technology side. How can this open source world grow and thrive? And at the same time, how can companies have a successful growing business in this space without colliding with open source? And that really is what I do.
That's awesome. Once again, Dirk, thanks for chatting with me today. And of course, we'll see you again soon at the next conference. Maybe next year. There's nothing this year, so we'll see you again in next year.
My next conference will be LinuxConf Australia, which is illogically in New Zealand next year. So Christchurch in January.
Awesome. So thank you so much once again, and see you again. Bye.
Pleasure.
Awesome. Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bharti, and we are here at KubeCon in Seattle, and we have with us Dirk Hohndel. Welcome to the show. And first of all, it's nice to see you again.
I'll make you actually say my name. Dirk Hohndel.
Oh, really?
Yes, Hohndel.
Dirk Hohndel.
Yes, thank you.